Whether you picture buccaneers or modern day cargo jackers, pirates aren't usually associated with India. It is fascinating then that it was a pirate whose success, albeit brief, almost changed the course of India's history. And today, on the History of India show, we bring you the story of how a pirate raid on a Mughal treasure ship started the first truly global manhunt. We don't know a lot about the early life of Henry Every. Born to a working class family in Devon, England, Every went to sea at an early age, joining the Royal Navy in 1689 and serving during the 9 Years' War. He later found work as a slave trader on the African coast. In 1693, Every joined a Spanish privateering expedition, a joint venture between King Charles II of Spain and investors from England. The plan was to plunder French vessels in the West Indies. Due to his experience as a sailor, Every was promoted to first mate after joining the expedition. However, the crew languished in the Spanish port of Corunna for months as the expedition couldn't leave port because the necessary legal documents hadn't arrived from Madrid. Desperate and angry, with some of the men believing that they had been sold into slavery to the Spanish, the men asked for their back pay. The commander of the expedition wrote back to England asking for the money. It was too late. In 1694, capitalizing on the poor morale of the crew, Every led a mutiny and took over the expedition's flagship and sailed out of port. After being named the captain, Every renamed the ship as the Fancy. Their initial plan was to sail for the Caribbean, but Every suggested an even more audacious plan, sailing around the Horn of Africa and into the Indian Ocean. Every and his men sailed along the coast of Africa, raiding several vessels and adding crewmen from plundered ships along the way. They rounded the Cape of Good Hope and stopped at Madagascar in early 1695 to rest and restock. Around this time, Every learned of the Mughal fleet, which was due to sail out of the Red Sea port of Mocha, homeward bound for the Indian port of Surat. Along with pilgrims making their way back home from Mecca and trading vessels, the fleet also contained treasure ships belonging to the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, including the Gunj-I-Sawai, which some claimed was the biggest ship in all of India. At this time, India was the wealthiest country in the world under the last great Mughal emperor. The British East India Company had been in business for less than a century, trading calico, cotton, and other goods. With their targets set, Every set sail with his men towards the island of Perim at the mouth of the Red Sea, ready to etch his name into history. However, the Fancy and its crew of 150 weren't enough to raid the Mughal treasure fleet. When they reached the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb in August 1695, Every joined forces with 5 other pirate captains: Thomas Tew commanding the Amity, Richard Vaunt on the Dolphin, Joseph Farrow on the Portsmouth Adventure, Thomas Wake on the Susanna, and William Mays on the Pearl. Every was selected as the admiral of the flotilla since his ship was the most advanced and also carried the most number of men. The pirates waited for their prey, but the convoy of 25 Mughal ships passed by in the night. Every and his men gave chase the following day. The Dolphin proved to be too slow and she was burned, with the crew joining Every on the Fancy. The flagship of the Mughal fleet, an enormous treasure ship called the Gunj-I-Sawai, and her escort ship, the Fateh Muhammad, fell behind. Every and his ships went after the Fateh Muhammad first. Thomas Tew on the Amity went in for the attack, but it was repulsed. Tew was killed in the exchange and the Amity sailed off, not rejoining the fight. When Every and the Fancy caught up with the Fateh Muhammad, the crew didn't put up much resistance after being weakened by the battle with the Amity. The pirates plundered the ship and made off with treasure worth over £10 million in today's money. Evri and his men then sailed after the Gunj-I-Sawai, overtaking the enormous Mughal treasure ship a few days after the sack of the Fateh Muhammad. With the Amity out of the battle and the Dolphin already burnt, the Fancy only had the Pearl and the Portsmouth Adventure with it for the attack. The Gunj-I-Sawai was a fearsome opponent. The giant ship had 80 cannons ready to blow any opposition out of the water. The ship also had 500 riflemen armed with muskets. Evri and his men were outgunned by the massive ship, but Lady Luck was on their side. As the battle began, Evri had a massive slice of luck when one of the first shots fired by the Fancy took down the main mast of the Gunj-I-Sawai. There was further confusion on the Mughal vessel when one of the cannons malfunctioned and exploded, killing everyone in the vicinity. The pirates then got their ships alongside the Mughal ship and boarding parties were sent aboard. One story claims that the captain of the ship, Muhammad Ibrahim, ran down below deck as the pirates had started boarding and sent a group of armed slave girls to fight in his stead. The battle lasted 3 hours, but Evri had finally captured the prize of a lifetime. After the battle was over, the victorious pirates started an orgy of murder, torture and assault that lasted several days. A number of women on board reportedly chose to kill themselves rather than fall to the hands of Evri's men. According to some reports, including a letter by Sir John Gere, then Governor of Bombay and President of the East India Company, an elderly relative of Aurangzeb was also aboard the ship. And then there was the plunder. The loot taken from the Gunj-I-Sawai reportedly totaled up to 600,000 pounds, which converts to over 100 million pounds today. When the Gunj-I-Sawai finally limped back into port at Surat, word of the attack spread like wildfire. The Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb was livid. He was so offended at his ship being plundered and pilgrims coming back from Mecca being attacked that he nearly ordered an attack on the settlement of Bombay. Every one of the company's workers in Surat were arrested and put in chains. Aurangzeb also closed down the English factories in Surat, Bombay, Agra, Bhuj and Ahmedabad. The fallout from Evri's attack nearly destroyed the English East India Company. The company was already in a major downswing in business at this point, following the disastrous Child's War, also called the Anglo-Mughal War, which we'll cover in a future episode. Although Aurangzeb initially wanted to boot the English out of India, cooler heads prevailed, and the company promised to compensate the Mughal emperor on his losses, filing an insurance claim worth £350,000. The company was also given the job of policing the Arabian Sea and providing protection from pirates. With the East India Company's existence in jeopardy, the company also secured a royal proclamation against piracy back home in England. There was a bounty of £1,000 on Evri's head, and thus began the first global manhunt. With the Mughal emperor finally appeased, he finally released the company's workers in Surat after 9 months. Despite the manhunt, Evri and his crew were one step ahead of any pursuers, and they headed for the Caribbean. They reached Nassau in 1696 and bribed Governor Trott to look the other way. With the British authorities scouring the globe for Evri and his men, the manhunt finally caught up. Governor Trott, who had already realized who Evri and his men really were, tipped them off and helped most of the men escape. Only around 24 of Evri's men were ever caught, with 7 being executed. At this point, Evri vanishes into history. Some reports claim that he sailed to Ireland in a ship captained by our old friend Joseph Farrow. Other stories claim that Evri died in poverty back home in Devon after being cheated out of his wealth by merchants. The most fanciful of these tales state that Evri saw out his days in Madagascar, living in the pirate utopia of Libertalia. Henry Evri was in the spotlight only briefly, but his audacious and brutal attack on Aurangzeb's treasure ship saw him go down as one of history's most notorious pirates. His attack almost had huge consequences in India. The Mughal emperor came very close to kicking the British East India Company out of the country. And this is where we leave you today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the History of India show. If you are enjoying our content, do take a few seconds to leave a like on the video and subscribe to our channel. We would also love to hear from you regarding what part of India's history you would like for us to cover in the future. Hope to see all of you again in the next episode of the History of India show.